Okay, greetings everyone, and welcome to the second pre-writing presentation for starting the justice paper. And this one is affectionately called the hill to die on approach. So I want you just to think for a minute about what that idiom means. And when you have a hill to die on, what does that mean to you? You should be thinking of things like, well, having a hill to die on means that it's something I really care about, or I care about a lot, or like I wouldn't just let slide if something happened. This is something I'm really passionate about. And so this approach is really based on that idea that all of us have things in our lives that we really care a lot about. And you should know as a writer, it's always a good idea to write about the things you care about and what you know. Good writers always write what they know. So this approach kind of combines all of that thinking in it. And so it really is just another chance to try to get your mind wrapped around this big justice paper in a way that'll make it exciting and something that you really want to write about. Last semester, I was finding that students were getting to the gray planning sheet that I talked about in the previous video, and they were just feeling really overwhelmed and not quite sure exactly where to start. And some of them had like certain events in their life they wanted to talk about, and some of them were history buffs and really cared about certain periods in history. Or I had one student last semester that was really interested in genocide because he had two friends that had suffered through different genocides. And so there were some people that were just off and running. And then there were a lot of students that were like, yeah, I still don't know. And so this approach is kind of for those people. How can we help you get started in a way that makes it so you're writing about something you care about? Okay, so the first question or the first step here, and hopefully you have some paper out so that you can be taking some notes on your thinking as you're listening to me talk about this. But step one is just to think about, what are you passionate about? Where's your hill to die on? What do you care about? So take a minute, pause the presentation here, and just make a list of all the things in your life, in society, things that are going on or happening that you care about. Okay, hopefully you paused the presentation because I'm going to keep going at this point. But part of what I'm going to do here is I'm going to recreate two different conversations I had last semester where I took students through these questions and really helped them hone in on a paper. So one of the ones I'm going to talk about was a student that came to my office, actually the same class where we did the gray pre-writing sheet that you were looking at in the previous presentation. And she just said, I just feel so lost. I don't know what to do. And so first thing I asked her is I said, so what do you care about? And so one of the things she talked about is her major. And that's always a good place to start. Like, what are you majoring in? Hopefully you're majoring in something you care about. And so she was a nursing major. And I just said, well, talk to me about that. Like, why did you pick that? So what? Why nursing? Right? And so she just spent some time and we just talked about it. Right? And so she went through like why she cares about equal access to healthcare and why it should matter, and how, society should have a healthcare system that protects everybody and everyone should have access to that preventative care as well as care when they're sick. And then she said, and what's really starting to bother me is how there's all these laws that are coming that are really restricting women's rights, like reproductive rights. And so we started talking about that a little bit more, and she was talking about something she was learning in one of her other courses about women in other countries. For example, one of the countries she was talking about specifically was Ireland, where abortion is illegal, and girls who leave Ireland to go to like England or another place to have an abortion actually get arrested or in a lot of trouble when they return home to Ireland. And so she was just talking about how unfair that was, and how she was really starting to sense that the abortions in the U.S. were becoming under attack. And so she was just talking about what she was thinking and why she cares about it. And I was just listening and asking questions so that she could kind of clarify what she was thinking. So in your list of all the things that you wrote about, hopefully there's a couple on there that you could just do some more thinking. Like, why do you care about it? What is it about this thing you wrote down that really matters? And so it might be some satellite writing you do now where you really just brainstorm of why these different issues matter to you. I had another student that came to my office, same situation, and one of the things he mentioned is and it connects to Serial actually, because he was saying, I really like the true crime podcast that we're listening to, and I like hearing about the court systems and understanding the way the criminal justice system works. But, I've done some more reading about it, and I'm in a political science class, and I've just been really thinking about how crowded U.S. prisons are, and how we have one of the biggest prison population in the world, and how did we get here, and why, it used to be that in prison you could go to school and learn a job, and it just feels like anymore they're just like these housing places that just house people, and it's not about making their lives different or better so that they could rejoin society. And he started talking a lot about that, and again I asked lots of questions and really had him explore what he was thinking. And so those two topics are the two topics that I'm going to use and tell you the rest of those conversations as we go through the other steps. So again, here at step 1, just make sure you have a list of some of those things you're really passionate about. Do some writing, really try to figure out why you care about it and what it means to you. Okay, and so we're going to move on now to step 2. Pause if you need to at any point. Okay, so step 2 then is brainstorm a little bit more about that. So now that you're thinking, okay, I know what I care about and I know why I care about it, now start to relate it. How does it intersect with the things we've been talking about? So for example, if you think about the healthcare, the women's health and reproductive rights healthcare conversation that I was having with the one student, my nursing major student, the next thing we started talking about was, well, what justice types did she really see play into those ideas? And so right away she's like, well, this is a social justice issue, and this is a distributive justice issue. How do we hand out healthcare, and who makes those rules? So it's a legal justice thing and a procedural justice thing. And she said it's even a communicative justice thing, because we feel like people are promising, society should be promising to take care of its citizens. And so she just had those justice types. She really felt like kind of focused in on what she was thinking about. And the reason that's important is because even though in your big justice paper, you are not to be talking about distributive justice and communicative justice and social justice, you are supposed to be talking about those big ideas of those. And so it's once you kind of figure out which justice types you're really kind of running around in, you can start looking at those big ideas. And we're going to do that in a minute when I talk about how to take those justice types and form them into that journey with those stops. Now, my other student that was really focused on the criminal justice system, we talked about his issue, and his were different, because he said, well, the U.S. prison system is a social justice issue. It's a procedural justice issue, but it's also really a retributive and a restorative issue, because where we have retribution, we don't seem to have restoration. And so that is really that transformative part of the criminal justice system we really seem to be missing. Okay, so again, take your passion and try to figure out where it fits into the larger conversations that we've been having. So pause the presentation here and see if you can figure out what justice types really come into play with your passion. Okay, again, hope you pause because I'm moving on. Now, the next step here is to kind of figure out your thesis. So what? So what you care about the healthcare system? So what you care about the prison system? What is your big idea? So what? Why do you care? And what is your big idea about all of this? What does justice mean to you through the lens of your passion? So again, I'm going to go back to my scenarios. The first student, that was my healthcare student, she was really looking at, like society, like everyone should be protected and served. So she was really focusing in still on that procedural and social justice piece, thinking, people in society should be protected and they should be served. And so that was really what mattered. Like healthcare should be for everyone. We shouldn't be limiting it, and everyone should be protected and served by it. And so that's where she was focused. So she wrote that down. Now it's not pretty, and we all know we cannot use the "for there to be justice" sentence starter in our big justice paper. And right now it's not about having a pretty thesis, it's about capturing the right ideas so that you can wordsmith it and make it punchy later. Now my other student, He really wanted to talk more about how, crime is all about the unbalancing of the scales of justice. So any system, any criminal justice system should be more about rebalancing those scales. And with that, you really have an opportunity to transform society. So he felt that for there to be justice, society must be transformed, right? And so we must transform society to keep the scales balanced. And so those are the kinds of ideas he was focusing on. So take a minute, pause the presentation and see, so what? You should know that question. We did that with your narrative. So what? What really matters? And what can you write down right now? Just again, capturing those big ideas that you feel like is the main point you want to make about your passion. Okay, now think about how far you've come. You've started with your passion, you've connected it to the different justice types and the course themes that we've been talking about, you've written a thesis, and now you're ready to plan your stops. So now it's time to kind of look at those big ideas. So what matters? How are we going to get to that thesis statement? So for my healthcare student, the first thing we talked about, or she talked about, is she said, well, you know what? All of this has to do with having people in charge that are making the decisions that's for the best interest of everyone. So again, that's that legal justice wise leader idea. So she wanted to start there. And then she said, well, you know what? If you have people in charge that are making wise decisions, then they can be developing fair processes. And if the processes are fair, that allows everyone's voice to be heard. So fair process leads to this fair situation where everyone has a voice in society so that they have the opportunity to pursue what they want for their lives, which leads to legitimacy. Now, that was the journey that she came up with based on her healthcare, women's reproductive rights, passion. And again, that was going to lead to that thesis of everyone should be protected and served by society. So that was the journey she came up with. My student that was interested in the criminal justice system, he was looking at it a little bit differently. And he said, well, you know what? I have to first start with the fact that any crime in society unbalances the scales of justice. So I have to start there with the crime. And that might sound a lot like your retributive and restorative paper a little bit, which it should, right? And because you have to start there. First, there has to be an unbalance. We can't fix something until there's a problem, right? So he's going to start with just the fact or the theories that when there's a crime, it is actually hurting everyone in society, right? There's this whole unbalance that needs to be solved. And so then he's going to talk about a fair process. How do you then repair that harm? How do you rebalance the scale? So the process that's in place has to be fair. And then he's going to move to how, if the process is fair, that's very much a procedural justice thing, then the punishment can be fair. Now that's more moving into a retributive justice idea. It can also bring in some social justice ideas. And then he was going to move to restoration. How do we go beyond just punishing people to actually restoring people, right? How do we fix what's broken? How do we change people so that they're sorry? How do we repair that harm? And then once we do that, that leads to transformation of society, which then again was his thesis. So it's a good idea to end in transformation. So he was talking about you can almost picture some of the stories. He really wanted to end with the wounded seal because that's a good story about transformation, right? You can picture that scene in when the seal hunter heals the wounded seal and then the whole community is happy and rejoicing, right? And so that is that transformation. Actually, at this point, you should know that if you have a journey where I know of other texts that can actually help your journey, at this point, I pointed him towards a wonderful TED Talk about the neuroscience of restoration and how it actually transforms the brain and the person and the lives. It was really cool. And so I was like, oh, I have the perfect source for you. So know that I'm always available to kind of give you those little golden nuggets of brilliance that can help you really with your paper. Okay, so plan your journey. So at this point, start to look at those big ideas, look at the justice types you have, keep in mind your thesis, and build a journey that will get you there. So pause the presentation. You still have that gray sheet out and see what you can do. All right, step 5. Now it's time to do some text sorting. You should be able to figure out what text from your text set works really well to illustrate all of the things you're saying. Don't forget that using those expository texts for each stop is crucial because you must provide the theory. That is the backbone, that is the spine of what you are talking about. So you have to do that. So figure out what expository text you're going to need for each stop and then sort your stories. What stories matter in the different stops? If you're thinking of the healthcare examples, she's certainly, if she's going to start with wise leaders, going to start with Prince Lepiot and probably the story of a good king, right? Those are those leaders that we can really compare and contrast. Then if you're looking at the criminal justice one, like I said, he's going to end in transformation. That is a good idea to use the wounded seal and that neuroscience text I talked about. So pause the presentation here, look at the text and figure out what text sort into the what stops and how can you use them to create that journey leading towards your thesis. Okay. Now you get to look at the big picture. It's almost your chance to zoom out because here's where you connect to the journey. The journey gets us from our invitation to our destination. So I will tell you how that works okay, so I'll start with my healthcare student. She was saying, I think I mentioned this already, she was talking about a case she heard about in Ireland where a girl left the country to get an abortion and then was arrested for murder when she returned to Ireland. And so that is an incident that happened, right? It's a historical incident, it's not a personal incident, that's okay. So she needed to find those sources that to support that. You can't just talk about, hey, I read this, right? She actually needed to find the articles that addressed it. And so you already know you can add different text to your text set if you need to for your personal journey. So she did that and she found those texts and that's the incident that propelled her into her essay. My other student, the one that did the criminal justice part, he instead looked up a whole bunch of expository text that kind of painted a whole picture of the prison system. So for him, it's more of a problem to solution journey because the problem is the overcrowded prisons, the fact that we don't rehabilitate anymore, right? And so then he is leading into the idea that restoration and transformation is what's really going to solve society so that we can then be better, right? And so that's a problem to solution journey. So at this point, back up a little bit and look at your big picture of what you've got and see if you can fit it into one of the journeys that we've already established. Okay, at this point, I remember both of these conversations in my office because at this point there were smiles. They looked at me, they're like, I've got it. I know what I'm doing now. I'm ready to go. And they were ready to go. When they went home and they wrote their brain dump because they had a very clear direction. They were writing about something they knew about and were passionate about. And all of a sudden the paper was fun. So that's what how I hope you're feeling at the end of this presentation. I hope this was helpful and just another way to think about this whole process. Again, if for some reason you've really botched up your gray sheet from the original presentation and now it's all scribbled, know that thinking is messy and that certainly happens. If you have to, recreate it on paper or print yourself another pre-writing sheet. You can show me all of it. I'd love to hear all of your thinking and how it all changed and what you were kind of going through as you thought about this process. So I'm excited to see your pre-writing sheets. They're due on Wednesday. And I'll give you some feedback if you need it. And then you're ready to start on your brain dump. Happy writing. Good luck. Let me know how I can help.